It was a quiet evening in Brembate di Sopra, a small town in northern Italy, when 13-year-old Yara Gambirasio left her gym after practice. She was just a short walk away from home, but she never made it back. What happened that night would become one of Italy's most gripping murder mysteries, leading to a massive investigation that spanned years and involved groundbreaking forensic work. Hey, true crime fans. I'm your host, Eamon, and I'm thrilled to share crime tales across times with you. Each episode will explore a new case, examining the evidence and discussing the twists and turns. My goal is to create a community where we can discuss these cases, share our thoughts, and learn from each other. So, let's get started. It was a chilly evening on November 26th, 2010, when Yara Gambirasio left her gym in Brembate di Sopra, a quiet town in northern Italy. Yara was a bright, happy teenager, known for her love of gymnastics and her close-knit family. That evening, she had attended her usual training session at the local sports center, just a short distance from her home. She was supposed to return within minutes, but as the clock ticked past her expected arrival time, her parents began to worry. At first, they assumed she had been delayed, perhaps chatting with friends or taking a slightly longer route home. But when multiple calls to her phone went unanswered, panic set in. Yara was not the kind of girl to stay out without informing her parents. By 7 p.m., her family contacted the police, and a search began immediately. But despite scouring the surrounding area, there was no sign of her. Investigators turned to her last known phone activity and discovered that she had sent a text message at 6:44 p.m. That was the last recorded activity before her phone went silent. Even more disturbingly, scent tracking dogs traced her last movements, but instead of leading home, her scent veered in the opposite direction, toward a neighboring town called Mello. The days following Yara's disappearance were filled with fear, confusion, and desperate searches. Police and volunteers combed through fields, abandoned buildings, and nearby roads, hoping to find any trace of the missing girl. But nothing surfaced. As days turned into weeks, investigators expanded their search, analyzing security footage, phone records, and witness statements. As police intensified their investigation, they turned to modern forensic techniques, analyzing thousands of phone records in the hopes of identifying anyone who might have been near Yara Gambirasio at the time of her disappearance. Surveillance footage, mobile tower pings, and wiretapped calls became key components in their search. It wasn't long before authorities zeroed in on a suspect, a Moroccan immigrant named Mohammed Fikri, who worked in construction. His arrest came after an intercepted phone conversation appeared to contain an incriminating phrase, which was initially translated as, "Forgive me, God, I did it." With this potential breakthrough, law enforcement wasted no time. Fikri was taken into custody, and the media quickly latched onto the narrative of a foreign worker being involved in the tragic disappearance of a young girl. However, as linguists and forensic analysts took a closer look at the audio recording, they realized the translation was incorrect. The actual phrase Fikri had spoken had no criminal implications whatsoever. Further investigation found no evidence linking him to the crime. Within days, he was released, and the case was back to square one. Months passed, and hope for answers seemed to dwindle. That was until a chilling discovery on February 26, 2011, exactly 3 months after Yara had vanished. A man flying his remote-controlled plane over an abandoned field in Cignolo di Sola, about 6 miles from Yara's home, noticed something unusual on the ground. As he approached, he was met with a heartbreaking sight: the remains of a young girl, partially decomposed, still clad in her gym attire. Authorities quickly arrived at the scene, and forensic teams began their grim work. Yara's body bore multiple stab wounds, but curiously, none were immediately fatal. It appeared that she had suffered from a combination of stab injuries and exposure to the cold. Investigators also noted that her clothing had not been removed, suggesting that the attack may not have been sexually motivated. Forensic experts carefully examined the evidence. Fibers, hair, and most importantly, traces of male DNA were found on Yara's leggings and underwear. However, there was no immediate match in any national database. This critical but puzzling clue would set the stage for one of Italy's most complex and extensive DNA investigations, one that would eventually lead to the real perpetrator. As the investigation into Yara Gambirasio's murder dragged on, the biggest breakthrough came from the DNA found on her underwear. The male genetic material provided investigators with a vital clue. But there was a problem. When forensic teams ran the DNA sample through Italy's criminal database, they found no match. The perpetrator had no prior criminal record, making him nearly invisible to law enforcement. This realization led authorities to take an extraordinary step, one of the most extensive DNA screenings in Italian history. Determined to find a match, police launched a massive operation, collecting DNA samples from thousands of men across the Lombardy region. They focused on individuals who lived near Yara's hometown of Brembate di Sopra and expanded their search to surrounding areas. Over time, forensic experts examined more than 18,000 samples, hoping for a clue that would crack the case wide open. Their persistence paid off when they found a partial match with a man named Damiano Garinoni. While Damiano himself was not the killer, the match suggested that the perpetrator was closely related to him. Investigators began tracing the Garinoni family tree, following the DNA trail like a puzzle. Eventually, their search led them to a man named Giuseppe Garinoni, a bus driver who had died in 1999. Given the genetic connection, police initially suspected that Giuseppe was Yara's killer. However, this theory was impossible. He had been dead for over a decade when the crime occurred. That meant only one thing: Giuseppe had an unknown child, one who had inherited his DNA and was now the prime suspect. The revelation sent detectives on yet another search, this time for the mother of the killer. They scoured hospital records, birth certificates, and even old workplace logs to identify women who had been in contact with Giuseppe Guarinoni. After exhausting several leads, their breakthrough came when they found a woman named Esther Arzuffi. She had worked in an area Giuseppe frequently visited, and most importantly, she had 2 children, twins named Massimo and Laura Bossetti. With growing suspicion, authorities discreetly obtained a DNA sample from Massimo Bossetti, a local construction worker. To do this without alerting him, they set up a routine police checkpoint and pulled him over for a breathalyzer test. Unbeknownst to Bossetti, the real purpose was to collect a sample of his saliva. When the results came back, it was a perfect match. The DNA on Yara's clothing belonged to him. On June 16, 2014, nearly 4 years after Yara's murder, police arrested Massimo Bossetti in a dramatic operation. As officers surrounded him, he appeared stunned and repeatedly insisted on his innocence. But the forensic evidence against him was overwhelming. Not only did his DNA match, but investigators also discovered that fibers from his van were found on Yara's clothing, suggesting she had been inside his vehicle. Furthermore, his internet history raised even more red flags. His computer contained searches related to young girls, torture and disturbing content. His phone records also revealed another critical detail. His device had been mysteriously turned off at the exact time Yara disappeared, only to be switched back on later that evening. Despite the mounting evidence, Bossetti continued to deny any involvement. His arrest marked the beginning of a long legal battle that would divide public opinion and make headlines across Italy. But for Yara's family, it was the first step toward justice. The trial of Massimo Bossetti became one of the most highly publicized court cases in Italy, drawing intense media coverage and public scrutiny. His defense team, led by a group of experienced lawyers, aggressively challenged the prosecution's case. Their primary argument revolved around the reliability of the DNA evidence, which had been the foundation of Bossetti's arrest. They claimed that the DNA sample collected from Yara's underwear was degraded and potentially contaminated, suggesting that errors in forensic analysis could have led to a wrongful conviction. Another major point of contention was the missing biological material. While Bossetti's genetic markers were found in the sample, his mitochondrial DNA, a component inherited exclusively from the mother, was not detected. The defense used this discrepancy to cast doubt on the prosecution's findings, arguing that the DNA evidence was incomplete and inconclusive. They also questioned the legality of the massive DNA collection effort, suggesting it had been an invasion of privacy and could have led to procedural errors. Bossetti immediately appealed, maintaining his innocence and insisting that the evidence had been misinterpreted. His legal team requested a review of the DNA analysis, arguing that the sample should be re-examined using newer forensic techniques. However, every appeal was denied. In 2018, Italy's highest court upheld the life sentence, cementing Bossetti's fate behind bars. For Yara's family, the conviction brought a sense of closure, but it could never undo their loss. Her parents, who had stayed out of the media spotlight throughout the investigation, finally spoke out after the trial, expressing relief that justice had been served. However, they also acknowledged that no verdict could ever bring back their daughter or erase the pain they had endured. The case of Yara Gambirasio left a lasting impact on Italy, sparking debates about forensic science, privacy rights, and the reliability of DNA evidence. It became a landmark investigation, demonstrating the incredible power of genetic profiling in solving crimes, but also raising questions about its limitations. But even with the conviction, some still wonder, was justice truly served? Could there have been an alternative explanation for the DNA evidence? Or was Bossetti indeed the monster behind Yara's tragic fate? What do you think? Do you believe the court made the right decision, or do you think there's room for doubt? Let's discuss in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking true crime stories from around the world. Until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant. This is Crime Tales Across Times, signing off.